elevated when I get to the penthouse. On top of the mountain, I feel like I'm Moses. In spiritual science, you know I'm devoted. I'm pulling your rank, you got the motive. I just want the money, I don't want the fame. It's you and that verse, so you know my name. You gotta be cool when you playing the game. But as time goes on.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Mental Gymnastics. I'm your host, Professor Zeus, and today we are going to be looking at a couple of things today. Well, specifically one thing, but branched out to a whole bunch of different things. So recently, I came across some information that I thought was pretty interesting, as well as pretty alarming. If you guys don't know, the World Health Organization, which is a international organization that forefronts things like vaccines, world health, different things like that. They basically are considering like a pandemic treaty. So with this pandemic treaty, it essentially could be very catastrophic for Americans. Specifically, if the United States were to actually, move forward with this, like America would be obligated to give away 20% of its medical supplies in the event of a future pandemic or something like that. But the people who actually testified for this, because what's happening is in London or the United Kingdom, they're having some parliament discussions on this. And you have people who are former officers of the World Health Organization coming out saying, yeah, this is where this is leading to. Everybody should get ready. I'm gonna pull up the articles and stuff like that, but I just find it so interesting that every day, every time we get some new information about these international organizations that control certain things, they just edge closer and closer to some sort of form of control. So I have some notes, right? So basically with what this pandemic treaty is about is, imagine a world like this. Instead of living in the United States, UK, London, France, what have you, you live in something called the United World of the World Health Organization. And the World Health Organizations, are going to be the ones to decide what the rules are wherever you live, right? And this is crazy. This is crazy. We live in societies where our governments for our respective countries, wherever we live, are the ones who, put forth different precedents, put forth different obligations and rules that everyday citizens are supposed to follow. But with this pandemic treaty now, it opens the gates for international communities to be the ones to actually, have say in what's going on. And remember, I talked about it last time with BlackRock. When you have a company that's heavily invested in so many different companies, they have a lot of force. They have a lot of leverage in order to say, or not even leverage, but voting power in order to, enact different things. And you have to ask yourself, what do these companies want? What are they trying to accomplish? So basically, before we get into that, if you want to support, head over to youniverse.co. We got 720 Degrees of Ascension, the physical copies and the ebook. We got tees, we got shorts. You can check out some of my music, some of my videos. I'd really appreciate any support. It's Universe for a reason. Now let's continue. So basically, this treaty would give the World Health Organization the power to decide when you're in a pandemic. What does being in a pandemic mean? What's the risk of a pandemic? How you should be eating, living, using your food and land to prevent future pandemics, and what you should talk about to prevent future pandemics. When you should go into lockdown, how the government should track you, survey you, look at different things like vaccine passports. Remember that time? You remember COVID? When COVID came, everybody had that little card. Where's that card now? Don't think these people forgot about that idea that you need. That's like, instead of the blue American passport, that little vaccine card is going to be the new passport. That's what they're talking about. This is all in the treaty. So, and what's even crazier is that a lot of these news organizations, the Associated Press, New York Times, Washington Post, ABC, CBS, whatever have you, they're all putting out information basically stating that this isn't something you need to be worried about. In fact, all of this is debunked. Like, forget the conspiracy theories. The World Health Organization isn't trying to do X, Y, and Z. But if you see the information for what it is, how can you even argue that, right? And so let me get into some of the articles right now, right? So we got two experts who testified actually last week who were warning about this, pandemic treaty. You have one, his name Dr. David Bell. He used to work for the World Health Organization as an officer. And then the other person, Wallace Brown, he chairs global health policy at the University of Leeds. And they basically outlined how this could reshape health policies in the World Health Organization member states in a major way. So let me pull up the first article. Yep. So it's time for MPs to challenge the World Health Organization's power and money grab. The Pandemic Response and Recovery All-Party Parliamentary Group has heard how, if adopted, the World Health Organization proposed pandemic treaty and amendments to the international health regulations risk handing the International Advisory Health Body unprecedented powers to declare pandemics, lockdowns, and mandate vaccines with the force of international law. Speaking to APPG, members were Dr. David Bell, a clinical and public health physician with a PhD in population health and former WHO scientific and medical officer, and Professor Garrett Wallace Brown, chair in global health policy at the University of Leeds and director of the World Health Organization. According to Dr. Bell, the two agreements, as they're currently drafted, will hand the World Health Organization the authority to order measures including significant financial contributions by individual states, censorship of scientific debate, lockdowns, travel restrictions, forced medical examinations, and mandatory vaccinations during a public health emergency of its own declaring. So now, with this treaty, right, the World Health Organization will be the sole entity to say when we go into lockdown. If you have any other, how it was a huge debate, like, oh, you can't debate science, so don't challenge the science, and all of that's going to be out the window. Travel restrictions, all of that's going to be, going crazy. And you just have to ask yourself, who is at the forefront? Who's donating to the World Health Organization? Funny enough, guess who? Yeah, you're right. It's Bill and Melinda Gates, one of the top contributors to the World Health Organization. And we already know that the Gates Foundation, how they have their hand in so many different things, that the fact that they're trying to really, be one of the top donors and stuff like that for the World Health Organization says a lot, right? Because now, what does it say here? Now, the investors' interests, so like Bill and Melinda Gates and like all the other people who invest in the World Health Organization, their interests are actually going to be put as priority versus the people who are member states within the World Health Organization, right? But he said the World Health Organization was established in 1946 with the best of intentions. These pandemic instruments are forced on a fallacy regarding the frequency and impact of pandemics and would, if ratified, fundamentally change the relationship between the World Health Organization and national governments and their citizens. Now, Professor Brown, he also has a research team who's been advising the World Health Organization and others on the $31 billion a year plan for pandemic preparedness. and whether it's defensible or even feasible. He said the post-COVID policy environment has triggered a remarkable grab by various institutions to capture the pandemic preparedness and response agenda and its corresponding financial capacities. One particular concern involves the $31 billion per year price tag, particularly the $24 billion a year required from low and middle income countries. The concern is whether the number is appropriate or even feasible. Nations need to be able to address their individual public health needs to encourage better population health and resilience, and the sort of sums they will be required to contribute to pandemic preparedness could threaten to divert resources from where they are most needed. We already saw this happen during the pandemic, and there is evidence to suggest that this has continued. Like, he also goes on to say, what does it say? He also said this in, 2021, around the same time. Yeah, so here we are. Dr. Garrett Wallace Brown. Despite COVID-19, the G7 looks to miss another opportunity for global health leadership. Okay? And I wanted to see, he has where it's stated right here. The problem with this PPP, which is like what he calls this whole pandemic preparedness partnership. The problem with the PPP is that it merely continues our current obsession with vaccine discovery and immunization as a primary means for health security. This approach got us here in the first place and often comes at the expense of other preventative and preparedness measures. So we have people, right? We have people who are actively protesting what is happening with the World Health Organization. If this pandemic treaty goes through, we will just continue to be experiments for vaccine sales. I'm talking about they're just going to keep pumping vaccines and immunization instead of promoting proper health, proper diet and exercise, right? They just want us to use us as incubators for vaccines and immunization. But before all this happened, we could live right. We just eat right in biblical times. Come on now. Come on now. How far have we gone? This is concerning since an over-reliance on immunization for health security does not appropriately reflect the empirical evidence. Empirical being things that you can actually see, and particularly so in the case of COVID-19, in which social determinants, age, comorbidities, and previous exposure to infections play a determining role in explaining the transition from SARS-CoV-2 infection to severe forms of COVID-19, guys. And I appreciate these guys in the UK, bringing this stuff up, because also we have some American politicians who are actually bringing this up, because it's real. But a lot of people don't even realize that this is going on. Now let me pull this up if you guys think I'm joking. Let me pull this up. All right. So U.S. Congressman Chris Smith presses Secretary Blinken on Biden's push to enter binding pandemic treaty that could cede U.S. sovereignty to World Health Organization. U.S. would be obligated to follow the World Health Organization's dictates and give away 20% of its medical supplies in the event of a future pandemic. At a House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing today, Representative Chris Smith from New Jersey pressed Secretary of State Anthony Blinken on the Biden administration push to enter a binding international pandemic treaty that could cede American sovereignty to the World Health Organization, who, in the event of a future pandemic. So let's check this out real quick.
The zero draft WHO pandemic treaty that the administration and others are pushing to get put into effect at the WHO starts off with a harsh criticism of the United States and the international community by calling it a catastrophic failure of international of the community in showing solidarity and equity in response to the coronavirus pandemic. I've read the treaty. I'm concerned about it. Article 4 pays lip service to sovereignty and then has language that says, however, activities within their jurisdiction or control do not cause damage to their peoples and countries. So therefore, WHO would be empowered to step in. And we're talking about Tedros, a man who's been put into that position by the People's Republic of China. He was their candidate and obviously showed terrible, terrible judgment in the beginning and even to this day in recognizing the origins of the of COVID-19. Article 10 says that 20%, the United States would be obligated to provide 20% of our medical supplies, including tests, antiviral vaccines, medications, and the like, to WHO. For them, they just say, we want it, you have to give it by treaty obligation. The sovereignty issue is the biggest, in my opinion. You're pushing for it. Next year is probably when it may get adopted. Will it be sent to the Senate for ratification, or are you planning on using the executive agreement, which I think is a terrible way to do things? It ought to go to the Senate for ratification.
Congressman, thank you very much. Good to see you again as well. First, I'll try and be brief. We are not engaged in negotiating a COVID treaty. What we're engaged in is trying to strengthen the global architecture for dealing with pandemics and do it in a way that, for example, make sure that if there's a next time, and I think there inevitably will be a next time.
They're letting you guys know what they think, what a quote unquote think is going to happen.
That countries actually are committed to transparency, to sharing information, to giving access to international inspectors, that we have the tools to do that, and the countries agree to that. That's, of course, not what China did in this instance, and we've all paid a price for that. At the same time, I think what we clearly demonstrated is over the course of the pandemic, the United States was the leading and most generous country in making sure that vaccines could be made available to those who needed them. We did it through COVAX. We did it free of charge. We did it without political strings attached, and I can tell you that has dramatically benefited our diplomacy and our standing in the world, especially in contrast to the way other countries have done this.
Man, look, anything that has to give up some sort of American sovereignty, you think I can trust that? At the end of the day, I live in America. It's not within my own interests to think that America giving up its own sovereignty to an international health organization, that's not in my interest. I am interested in the best thing for America and then the best thing for the rest of the world, because this is where I live. This is where I was born, right? But what do you guys think, right? The World Health Organization, if this pandemic treaty goes through and America has to give up sovereignty, aka the thing that makes us our own, entity, giving that away to international organizations, how righteous is that? Leave some comments. Tell me what you think. The World Health Organization is telling you right now what's coming. They want more control. But look, it's you and I verse for a reason. I teach you, you teach me. Let's keep our eyes open, man. Till next time. Peace.
Elevated when I get to the penthouse. On top of my own, I feel like I'm Moses. Spiritual science, you know I'm devoted. I'm pulling your rank, you got the motive. I just want the money, I don't want the fame. It's you and I verse.